Okay, I guess it's like round two of LouiZa, Larry, and Louis setting boundaries because Louis does have a right to have boundaries. And people forget that he's also talking about when people make really inappropriate comments about family members that are not in spotlight. So it wasn't just about Zara. So it has been a turbulent week in the Louis Tomlinson fandom, and not for the usual reasons. This time, the story isn't just about a new relationship. It's about grief, boundaries, and the cost of being watched too closely for too long. So, is it a bit of a fallout? Maybe. This is kind of what happened in the last week where Louis said enough, right? So, and apparently he's leaving Twitter, but then there's fans saying that he's just going to use his burner account. So let's see. And then there's this thing about him having a Discord that he's trying to move the fandom to. So it will unfold in time. All right. So then, it's the LouiZa, Larry's, and then kind of how did this happen? All right. So, it sort of started quietly as all things do. Whispers, soft launches, Glastonbury sightings, and then there it was, a post, a caption, Louis Tomlinson and Zara McDermott, Instagram official. So for many, it was a moment of surprise, for some joy, for others heartbreak, and for a portion of the fandom, it was gasoline. Was it really gasoline? Because when something's going to go on fire, it does not necessarily need an accelerant, does it? So within hours, social media apparently spiraled. Some fans celebrated, and others kind of talking about this new relationship. And yeah, it didn't take long for LouiZa discourse to become, you know, subject to thinking it's a stunt because it kind of looks like it. So, but that is not what pushed Louis over the edge, in my opinion. I think what really pushed Louis over the edge had nothing to do with Zara. It were comments about his son and his late mum. So apparently, uh, Louis was saying, I'm all for freedom of speech. This is what Louis posted, but some of this conspiracy chat is downright hurtful. Talking about my child and my late mother makes it impossible for me to be on here. And that was it. That was the line, and Louis quit X. So the thing is, you can't block anyone on X anymore. So that that has contributed to like a lot of people thinking, oh my God, it's too much. So Louis did not name names. He didn't say it was only about Zara, but he made it clear this wasn't fandom anymore. He's sort of setting a tone, right? Now, you know what? Now, two truths can exist at the same time, right? Like Louis has a right to boundaries, but then fans have a right to kind of speculate if they want to, as long as they don't kind of, veer into is talking about family members that are private citizens. So let's pause and be clear. As much as he is such a hero, Louis Tomlinson is still a human being. But he might as well be a superhero. He has every right to say, here's some boundaries, right? And his grief is real. He is a father. Louis was kind of like the oldest in his family, and he was sort of like kind of a parental role to his siblings, even though he was a sibling. So could you imagine what it's like, when he became a father, like just how serious he took it? We don't know how often he sees Freddie and how the relationship is. It's none of our business. Thing is, I cannot imagine Louis not being devoted to his child. Like, bottom line. So there's no celebrity status, no fan theory, no music contract that will cancel the fact that he is a father. And the perspective is to weaponize someone's child or their mother's memory, is to validate a shipping narrative. That's kind of where there's that line that's crossed, right? Because the thing is, he can't. A person can be a father because you need like a female egg to do that, and also be LGBTQ plus. It's not binary. So the thing is, when it's affecting people that are not in the spotlight, I think there's some conversation to be had about that. And Louis, for all his loyalty to his fans, I guess finally said, enough of like veering into the talking about Freddie and his mom. Absolutely. Uh, so that things kind of get complicated because the backlash um, was about a number of things. So there were years where Louis whether in one direction or solo, where there was a lot of being observed, interpreted, speculated on, and it was nonstop. But that's social media. One direction going with social media. It's just how fandom can go viral, right? And there was they were about the burden of never being allowed to exist without being read like a puzzle, right? So, years later, there's a lot, like I've talked about this. There's videos where people are going down speculations about the origins of well, how did Louis become a father? Well, that's kind of like that's sort of like in a sacred space. Don't go there. So, not all conspiracies are created equal. So let's talk about, Larrys are not the problem, okay? Because the Larrys, a lot of the Larrys like to have fun. A lot of Larrys are not saying it's absolutely the truth. A lot of Larrys are just like, we really want it to be it. This must be it, right? Like, well, they're having kind of fun with it. Um, they're really just, we are just fans interpreting art, noticing patterns, connecting lyrics, and yes, sometimes seeing through the fog of media narratives. I will, I will stay on this hill. Louis knew what happened when he got the dagger tattoo to match Harry's rose. And I'm just going to say that because that's not the only one. There's a lot of complimentary tattoos. Sorry, you're going to get ink like that, telling. When Johnny Depp got Winona Forever, like in a tattoo, and then he had to like cover it up. Like, that's all I'm saying. They have never tried to cover up the tattoo, overwrite it, or anything. So there you go. So, when Louis makes comments about sort of social media, I think a lot of the antis kind of blame the Larrys, but it's not really the Larrys' fault. It's just, I think it's more the people that are, again, talking about family members that they shouldn't talk about. Because, see, many Larrys, they don't harass, they don't talk about Louis' son, they don't invade Zara's inbox. They have a right to say we think she's a gold digger and we don't think she's good enough for him, but we're not going to harass her. I just would rather him be with someone more classy like Eleanor, who was, a beard for 10 years, in my opinion. So, and for a long time, it's the Larrys have unfairly carried the weight of being dismissed, shamed, and accused, and that's not fair. That is not fair. Even when the Larrys, we were just kind of exploring theories in private spaces, but many Larrys, there's many really popular Larry Facebook groups where there's many Larry Facebook groups where it's like it's against the rules to talk about Louis' mom and his son because they respect Louis. So it's not fair to say it's all the Larrys caused him to do this. It's people that just wherever they stood, whether they were Larry, an auntie, a Huey, whatever the hell, they were just there's people who go too far regardless, right? Um, And of course, the fans feel betrayed because let's be honest, part of the reason this moment hits so hard is because there's some contradictions. Again, Louis got tattoos that fans interpret as coded. A dagger, again, the dagger that mirrors Harry's rose, because for months people said, get the dagger to match the rose, and he got the dagger. Initials that evoke shared timelines, and he's made choices, public and private, that they kind of fuel the speculation, like singing in a set. One of the last song to close a set is the song Seven, right? And that song starts with Larry called like smoking, right? And there's all this blue green. Everyone knows what the blue green means, so But I don't think they're queer baiting, and I'll tell you why. Because Larry, as much as it's huge, is not mainstream, right? It's not. It's sort of like it's like an open secret, but you have to kind of like really be looking or be sent down the algorithm by YouTube. So you can't queer bait when it's still underneath the surface. Anyway. And so, some fans say, is it feeding the fire? It's hard to be shocked when the smoke returns, right? Like I keep saying, you knew what the dagger meant. You knew what would happen when you wore that t-shirt. And these are fan responses flooding Twitter and TikTok right now. Because when you blur the lines between art and intimacy, people will read between them. And fans have been reading for over a decade. So I think, my opinion is Zara is a stunt, but because she's friends with him and his sisters, kind of a friend of the family, Louis being the protective, amazing, lad that he is like enough because Louis would defend anyone. Like he would defend anyone, whether they're famous or not, if they are close to him, because that is our Louis. All right. So remember, there is another layer we can't ignore. It's the music industry. So celebrities, especially those from legacy boy bands, that were put together on shows like X Factor and whatnot, they don't often have full control of the narrative because contracts, those contracts can cover a lot of things. It covers even the behavior of your own family that are not in the business. It's quite wild. So they don't have full control of the narratives. There's contracts, publicists, album rollouts, strategic pairings, and it's all part of this machine. And it's not irrational to ask how much of this is Louis and how much of it is management's cleaning house. Because sometimes the tweets don't sound like Louis, right? Because everyone's got a unique writing style. So, the fandom will have reactions. It's hurtful to kind of feel as the Larrys. A lot of Larrys are so loyal to Louis. It sort of feels like whoa, what is this, right? But where do we go from here? Where should we go? Because there's been a decade of mixed signals, and I keep referring to those tattoos. Um, I think things can exist in multiplicity. It's not completely black and white, right? But it's not just the Larrys that are the problem. It's not. There are people that are totally for Louis who are actually a problem too. So it's not any segment. It is certain people, and it only takes a few to go too far. Because Louis did not say that Larry's are the problem. He said certain behavior is hurtful, but that behavior includes things that Larrys are not doing. Because there's Larrys that do not ever talk about Louis's mom except with respect. Because if you are loyal to Louis, you wouldn't do it. You would not talk about uh, his late mom, his late sister. You just wouldn't, because he's been through enough. And if you're truly a Louis, like a Louis girl for life, right? You know how much Louis has been through, and you just don't want him to have any more additional sorrow and pain and hardship, because he's been through enough. And this is where sort of the true blue Lou fans, they're very protective of him. So the thing is, I I don't I don't think that if people I don't think this was a thing against the Larrys. I think it was just against certain behavior. But I'll tell you, I I think it was the sacred cow, right? Child, mother. And Louis is allowed to protect his family, but fans are also allowed to process the confusion, because the truth is rarely simple. But kindness, that should be. So, how do you feel about LouiZa and Larry? I mean, I'm biased. I admit it. I am totally a Larry. I was a Huey for a while, but now I'm a Larry. I mean, I was Larry, then Huey, then Larry. But I'm just not into LouiZa, and I'll tell you why. Because I don't like the fact that Zara has been known to make certain comments. I know she was like 21, she did it, but things are forever when it's quoted in the press, of course. But I guess it's like the natural protectiveness towards Louis. We just don't want him to be tainted with somebody who, and I know she's grown and all that, but I just don't get, it. It just feels orchestrated. And I'm sorry, Louis, I love you, but it feels like a stunt still.